The morning sun fell softly over the small convent that stood on the edge of a quiet countryside. Birds sang from the trees, and the smell of freshly baked bread drifted through the open windows of the dining hall. It was a peaceful place, far away from the noise of cities, filled with women who had devoted their lives to prayer, service, and love. Among them was an elderly nun everyone called Sister Helena. She was small in size, gentle in manner, and always had a warm smile for whoever crossed her path. Most people knew her as the kind woman who took care of the garden, polished the wooden benches in the chapel, and tended to the sick in the nearby village. She was never in a hurry, never complained, and always spoke with calmness that made others feel safe. There was something comforting about her presence, like she carried peace within her. Yet behind her kind eyes and her soft voice, there was a quiet story no one really knew. That morning, the convent was more lively than usual. The sisters were preparing for a community gathering that would take place in the main hall later that week. People from nearby towns were invited to attend. There would be speeches, hymns, and a short musical performance. For many, it was just a small event, but for the sisters, it was a way to bring the community together. As the younger nuns moved around setting up decorations and checking lists, Sister Helena was in the corner arranging fresh flowers. Her movements were slow but full of care. She placed every flower like it mattered. From the open door, she noticed a few men bringing in a large, polished piano. It was rented for the event, shiny black, elegant, and slightly taller than the altar beside it. The moment Helena saw it, she froze. Her hand stopped in midair as if time itself had paused. Her eyes softened, and for a second she wasn't in the convent anymore. In her mind, she was somewhere else. A grand hall filled with people, lights reflecting on polished wood, the soft echo of applause in the air. The image was so clear it almost made her heart ache. She blinked slowly and the memory faded. "Careful with that," one of the younger sisters said, pulling her attention back. Helena smiled, pretending nothing had happened, and returned to her flowers. But inside something had stirred, a small spark she hadn't felt in years. Later that afternoon, when the others were busy, she quietly walked into the main hall again. The piano stood alone in the sunlight that streamed through the stained glass windows. Dust floated in the air like tiny golden stars. She walked closer, her steps light, her heart strangely heavy. She hadn't touched a piano in over 40 years. Her fingers trembled slightly as she raised her hand and let it hover over the keys, not pressing them, just feeling the closeness. But before her fingers could land, a voice came from behind. "Oh, Sister Helena," said one of the volunteers kindly, "please be careful. This piano is for the performance. We'll start practice soon." Helena smiled, faintly embarrassed. "Of course, dear," she said softly and stepped back. The volunteer didn't mean to offend her, but the words stung. She looked at the piano one last time before walking away, her hands folded as they always were. The younger nuns began practicing songs and hymns later that evening. Helena listened from the corner as the notes filled the room. Some played well, others missed keys and giggled nervously. The sound of the piano echoed through the empty corridors, reminding Helena of something deep inside her, something that had been asleep for years. That night, as everyone went to their rooms, she couldn't sleep. The music played over and over in her mind, mixing with memories of her younger days. She could almost hear her teacher's voice, guiding her through difficult pieces, and the applause that once followed her every performance. She had once lived for those moments, the connection between her fingers and the sound, between sound and heart. But life had changed a long time ago. A tragedy she rarely spoke of had taken her away from that world. She had left the piano behind, walked away from the lights in the audience, and chosen a quieter path, one where music was replaced by prayer and applause by silence. The next morning, she woke early as always. The sky was still pale and the grass was covered with dew. She swept the chapel floor, lit candles, and arranged hymn books neatly on the pews. But as she moved, her mind wasn't in the present. She kept thinking of the piano. She could almost feel its keys under her fingertips, cold at first, then warm with touch. When the sun rose, a few of the younger nuns entered the hall to continue practicing. Helena watched them from afar. She didn't want to interrupt, but the music they played, cheerful but clumsy, filled her with a strange longing. At one point, the young woman playing missed a note and sighed in frustration. Helena smiled softly. She remembered how that felt. Later that day, as everyone prepared for lunch, one of the sisters noticed Helena sitting quietly outside, gazing at the horizon. "You seem thoughtful today," she said kindly. Helena smiled. "Just remembering old times," she replied. The sister chuckled. "You've lived a long life, sister. I'm sure you have many stories." Helena nodded. "Some stories are told," she said softly, "and some live only in the music we once played." The younger sister didn't quite understand, but felt the weight in her words. She sat beside her for a moment, curious but respectful. Helena didn't say more. Her eyes stayed on the fields where the wind moved through the tall grass like waves. As the day of the event approached, excitement filled the convent. The hall was decorated with ribbons and candles. Guests were expected from nearby towns, including the mayor and local families. Everyone had a role. Some would sing, others would serve food, and the piano performance was meant to be the highlight. On the morning of the event, Helena helped prepare the food and arrange seats. She was content to stay in the background as she always did. But her heart beat a little faster whenever she passed the piano. She could feel its silent pull. Before the program began, the performers gathered near the stage. Helena stood at the back of the room watching quietly. The main pianist, a young woman from the village, once was tuning the keys. The sound of each note rang clearly, filling the hall with anticipation. Then something small but meaningful happened. The pianist turned to adjust her sheet music and accidentally dropped one page near Helena's feet. Helena bent down, picked it up gently, and looked at the notes written on it. Her eyes scanned the page as if she were reading an old letter. Without realizing it, her fingers moved slightly, tracing invisible keys in the air. The young woman smiled politely and said, "Thank you, sister." Helena handed it back and replied softly, "You're welcome, dear." But in that brief moment, she felt the rush of memory, the feeling of reading music, of knowing it by heart, of understanding every mark on the page as if it were part of her soul. When the pianist began to play, Helena stood still, eyes closed for a second, letting the sound wash over her. The piece was beautiful, but her heart whispered quietly, "I know how that should sound. I know the story behind those notes." After the event rehearsal ended, most people left the hall. The piano stood there again, alone, bathed in the soft light of evening. Helena hesitated at the door, then slowly walked back inside. She looked around, no one was there. The silence was deep, almost holy. She walked to the piano and sat down carefully. Her hands hovered over the keys again, trembling. This time she pressed one. The sound was soft, delicate, but real. Then another, and another. Each note awakened something inside her. She began to play quietly. Not a full song, just a few lines from memory. The music filled the room like a whisper. A tear slid down her cheek. It wasn't sadness. It was something deeper, like finally speaking after years of silence. She stopped, wiped her eyes, and smiled faintly. "Still there," she whispered to herself. Unbeknownst to her, one of the younger nuns had walked in quietly and stood near the door. She didn't interrupt. She just watched in awe as the elderly nun's fingers danced over the keys with a grace that seemed almost divine. When Helena noticed her, she quickly stopped, startled. "Oh, I was just—" The young nun shook her head softly. "That was beautiful," she said. "I didn't know you could play." Helena smiled gently. "It's been a very long time." The young nun stepped closer, curious. "You play like someone who has lived inside music," she said. "Where did you learn?" Helena looked down at the keys, her smile fading into memory. "That's a long story," she said quietly. "One I thought I'd forgotten." The young nun sat beside her, sensing there was more. Something hidden beneath the years of silence and service. The piano stood between them, its keys still warm from Helena's touch. And in that quiet evening light, something changed. The secret she had carried for decades was ready to be told, and soon the world would hear it, not through words, but through the music she had kept locked inside her soul for so long. The next morning came quietly, wrapped in golden light and birdsong. Sister Helena woke early as usual. The convent was still, except for the sound of wind brushing through the trees outside her window. She dressed slowly, her old hands folding, her habit with care, her thoughts still lingering on the piano from the night before. The few minutes she had played had awakened something inside her she thought was gone forever. All morning, as she helped with breakfast and greeted visitors, she couldn't stop thinking about those few notes. They had felt so alive, so full of warmth. She tried to push the thought away, reminding herself that her duties came first. But each time she passed the main hall, her eyes wandered toward the piano, as if it were calling her name. Later that day, everyone gathered again to prepare for the event. The large hall was filled with chatter and laughter as decorations were adjusted and chairs were set neatly in rows. The piano stood at the front of the room, gleaming under the soft light that fell through the tall windows. The young nun who had seen Helena play quietly the night before gave her a gentle smile as she passed. When the others began their music rehearsal, Helena stood at the back of the hall. The piano player, a cheerful young woman from the nearby village, took her place and started to play a simple melody. Her fingers moved lightly over the keys, but her rhythm faltered now and then. She looked nervous, aware that people were listening. After the piece ended, a few guests who were helping with the arrangements clapped politely. "That was good," one said, "but maybe play it a bit slower next time." The pianist nodded shyly, then turned back to the piano. Helena watched quietly, her heart full of empathy. She knew that feeling, the pressure of wanting every note to be perfect. Her own fingers twitched slightly, remembering how to guide a shaky rhythm, how to make music feel alive instead of practiced. After the rehearsal, the group began discussing which hymns to include for the evening program. One of the organizers, a middle-aged woman from the town, noticed Helena standing nearby and smiled kindly. "Sister, would you like to sit?" she asked, pulling a chair for her. Helena smiled back. "Thank you, dear. I'm fine standing." The woman nodded and turned to the others. "We just need someone to play the opening melody for the prayer segment," she said. "It's a gentle piece, easy enough. Our main pianist will take over afterward." Helena hesitated for a moment, then spoke softly. "If you'd like, I could help with that part." The room went quiet for a moment. The woman looked surprised, though not unkindly. "Oh, sister," she said gently, "that's thoughtful of you. But we wouldn't want to tire you out. It's a long piece, and those piano keys can be a bit heavy on the hands." A few others chuckled lightly, not out of rudeness, but with that unthinking tone people use when they assume age means weakness. Helena simply smiled. "I understand," she said, folding her hands. "I only offered in case of need." "Of course, sister," the woman said quickly, still smiling. "It's wonderful that you want to help. Maybe next time." The young nun who knew about Helena's hidden talent opened her mouth to speak, but Helena gently shook her head. It wasn't the time. As the rehearsal went on, Helena sat quietly near the back, pretending to read a small prayer book. But her heart felt heavy. She didn't feel anger or pride, just a deep sadness, the kind that comes when someone underestimates the part of you that once meant everything. When the others took a break, she walked slowly outside to the courtyard. The autumn air was cool and smelled faintly of wet leaves. She sat on a stone bench and looked up at the sky, her fingers gently rubbing together as if they still held the memory of the keys. For years she had hidden this part of herself, the musician, the performer, the woman who once spoke through melodies instead of words. The world inside the convent was peaceful, but it had taught her to be small, quiet, and humble. She never complained. She never demanded to be seen. But now, seeing that piano again, feeling its sound echo through her bones, she realized that music was still alive inside her. It had only been sleeping. She thought of the day she first joined the convent, decades ago. Her heart had been broken, then out by loss, by change, by the noise of a world that no longer felt like home. In the silence of faith she had found comfort. Yet now, as the years had aged her body, her heart whispered softly, "You were born to play." As evening approached, the rehearsal ended. The piano was covered carefully with a white cloth, and the hall emptied out. The young nun from before lingered behind and walked up to Helena. "Sister," she said quietly, "why didn't you tell them? You could play that melody better than anyone here." Helena smiled faintly. "Sometimes," she said, People need to see before they believe, and sometimes it's not our place to insist. The young nun frowned gently. But it feels unfair. Helena looked at her, her expression kind and wise. Fairness is something we learn to let go of with time, she said softly. But hope never leaves us. There may come a moment when it's right to play again. The young nun nodded, though she didn't quite understand. She admired Helena's patience, but part of her wished the world could see what she had seen. The way that old woman's fingers had moved across the piano the night before, filled with grace and emotion that words could never match. That night after prayers, Helena went back to her small room. The sound of rain began to fall lightly outside, tapping on the window. She lit a small candle and sat by her desk. The flame flickered gently, casting soft shadows on the walls. She opened an old drawer and pulled out a tiny, worn notebook tied with a ribbon. Inside were faded pages filled with music notes written in her delicate handwriting. Her eyes softened as she turned the pages. Each line carried a memory, a song from her youth, a melody she had composed long ago. She traced one line with her finger and whispered, "I thought I'd never see you again." The rain continued outside, and for a moment she hummed a tune quietly, almost too softly to hear. Her voice was fragile, but full of life. She smiled to herself. She didn't need an audience. The music still belonged to her. It had never left. The next day, preparations for the event continued. More guests arrived, and the convent was busier than ever. Helena worked with the others, arranging flowers and helping serve tea. Everyone was focused on making the event perfect. At one point, as she carried a basket of candles through the hall, she overheard two guests talking near the piano. "Is that old nun still around?" one asked with a laugh. "She looked like she wanted to play yesterday." "Yes," the other replied lightly. "Bless her heart. I don't think she could even press the pedals properly." They chuckled quietly and moved on. Helena stood still for a moment, her eyes downcast. The words didn't make her angry. They only deepened the ache in her chest. She had learned to endure such things, but that didn't mean they didn't hurt. She continued walking, placing the candles carefully on each table. Her movements were slow but steady. She whispered a small prayer under her breath, not asking for recognition or praise, only for the strength to keep her heart open. That evening, as the sun began to set, the young nun visited her again. She carried a small tray of tea and placed it gently on Helena's table. "I heard what they said." The young nun murmured softly, "You don't deserve that." Helena smiled and took a sip of tea. "My dear," she said kindly, "people speak from what they see, not from what they know. It's all right. But don't you want them to hear you play? To know what you can do?" Helena looked out the window, where the last light of day was fading behind the trees. "Once I did," she said, "but now, I only want to play when my heart tells me it's time. Not to prove anything, not to impress anyone. Just because it's right." The young nun nodded quietly, understanding just enough to stay silent. When she left, Helena sat alone again, the sound of crickets rising outside. She looked down at her hands, old, wrinkled, fragile, and flexed her fingers slowly. They still moved gracefully, though not as fast as they once had. She smiled, faintly, and whispered to herself, "They think these hands are too weak. They have no idea how strong music can make them." And as the candlelight flickered, she closed her eyes and imagined the piano before her, the weight of the keys, the echo of the notes, the feeling of her soul flowing through her fingers. In her mind, she played a song only she remembered. What she didn't know was that fate was quietly arranging a moment, a small twist of circumstance that would soon change everything. For now, she remained in the quiet glow of her candle, unaware that the next time her fingers touched the piano, the whole room would fall silent, and the world beyond those convent walls would soon listen too. The day after the rain, the convent was filled with soft sunlight that poured through the windows, washing everything in a calm, golden glow. The air smelled of wet grass and fresh bread, and for a moment, everything seemed peaceful again. The event was just one day away now, and everyone was busy with final preparations. There was a quiet excitement in the air, But inside Sister Helena's heart, something felt different, as if an old memory was waiting to be told. She woke earlier than usual that morning. The world outside was still quiet, and even the birds hadn't started singing yet. She made her bed neatly, folded her shawl, and then sat by the window for a long time, looking out at the mist over the fields. Her mind wasn't in the present. It was drifting through time, back to a part of her life no one at the convent knew about. By the time breakfast ended, the other sisters were already setting up the hall. Helena joined them, helping arrange chairs and polish the floor. As she worked, the young nun who had seen her play the piano earlier approached her. She was holding a stack of papers and smiling gently. "Sister," she said softly, "we might need your help later today. The piano piece still isn't sounding right. The village girl says she's nervous about playing in front of everyone." Helena looked at her for a moment, then smiled kindly. "I'll do what I can to help her," she said. "Maybe you could listen to her practice?" The young nun suggested. Helena nodded. "Of course. Music always sounds better when someone listens with care." A few hours later, Helena stood at the edge of the hall while the young pianist practiced again. The girl's hands trembled a little and she missed a few notes. After a while, she sighed and leaned back, clearly frustrated. Helena walked closer, her voice calm and gentle. "You're playing beautifully," she said softly, "but you're thinking too much about the notes." The girl looked up, surprised. "I just don't want to make mistakes in front of everyone," she admitted. Helena smiled. "Mistakes are not your enemy, dear. Sometimes the heart needs to breathe between the notes. When you play, don't try to be perfect. Try to be honest." The girl frowned slightly. "Honest?" "Yes," Helena said, nodding slowly. "When you play from here," she placed a hand over her heart, "it doesn't matter if you miss a note. People will still feel something real." The girl looked down at the piano keys, thinking about those words. Then she smiled shyly. "You sound like you've done this before," she said. Helena chuckled softly. "Maybe once upon a time," she replied. The girl looked curious. "Were you a music teacher?" she asked. Helena hesitated for a moment. It had been years since anyone had asked about her past. She could have brushed off the question, but something in her heart told her it was time to speak. Just a little. "I wasn't a teacher," she said quietly. "But there was a time when music was my whole life." The girl's eyes widened. "Really? You played professionally?" Helena nodded slowly. "Yes, a long time ago." The girl's face lit up. "What was it like?" For a moment, Helena didn't answer. Her gaze drifted toward the window and her voice grew soft. "It was beautiful and lonely." The girl waited, sensing that Helena was remembering something she hadn't spoken of in years. "I started playing when I was a child," Helena continued. "My parents couldn't afford lessons, but there was an old piano in the community hall. I used to sneak in after everyone left just to touch the keys. At first I played by ear, copying whatever I heard. Later, someone noticed and offered to teach me. From there, everything changed. Music became my world." The girl leaned forward, fascinated. "I spent years performing," Helena said. "I traveled from town to town, playing in churches, theaters, sometimes in front of hundreds of people. I thought that was happiness, the applause, the lights, the sound of my name being called. But it was fleeting. When the lights went out and the hall was empty, I always felt something missing." She paused for a moment, her eyes growing distant. "Then one night, everything changed. There was a storm, much worse than the one we had yesterday. I was on my way to a performance and the car skidded off the road. I was lucky to survive, but someone I cared for didn't." Her voice trembled slightly at the end of the sentence. The girl's face softened. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Helena nodded quietly, her fingers brushing against the piano keys. "After that night, I couldn't play anymore. Every time I touched the piano, I felt the weight of what I'd lost. I thought maybe music had betrayed me, or maybe I had betrayed it. I stopped performing. I gave away everything and came here to this convent. I thought silence would heal me." The hall was quiet. Even the dust in the sunlight seemed to pause. "Did it?" the girl asked softly. Helena smiled faintly. "In a way, yes. But silence has a voice too, one that keeps asking questions you try not to hear. I thought I had forgotten music, but I realized now it was never gone. It was just waiting." The girl didn't know what to say. For a long moment, they both stood there, the old piano between them, a witness to the pain and peace that came with time. Finally, the girl spoke again. You should play tomorrow, she said quietly. Even just one song. People should hear you. Helena looked at her with gentle surprise. Oh no, she said softly. This isn't my time anymore. It's yours. But you have something no one else does, the girl said. You don't just play music. You feel it. I could see it in your eyes. Helena smiled kindly. That's sweet of you, dear, but the world doesn't wait for the old to return to their dreams. Maybe it should, the girl replied. Maybe that's exactly what it needs. Helena didn't answer. She only reached out and patted the girl's hand. You're very kind, she said softly. Now go on, practice. The notes will listen better if you play from your heart. The girl nodded, though she didn't stop thinking about what Helena had said. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Helena sat awake in her room. The story she had told had opened a door she thought was long locked. The sound of the rain outside reminded her of that storm years ago. The night everything had changed. She could still hear the echoes of that last performance she never finished, the last song she never played. She walked to her small wooden desk and opened her old notebook again. This time, instead of just looking, she began to write. The notes came slowly, one by one, as if her memory was guiding her hand. When she finished, she looked down at the page, a new melody born from both sorrow and peace. She smiled faintly. Maybe, she whispered. It isn't too late. The next morning, the convent was buzzing with energy. People were arriving early to help, and decorations filled every corner. The hall was alive with color and chatter. Helena went about her duties quietly, helping where she could, smiling when people greeted her. The young nun approached her again with a bright look. Sister, she said softly, I told the others about your story, how you used to be a pianist. They didn't believe me, Helena chuckled softly. That's probably for the best, the young nun smiled. But they'll believe it soon, she said with quiet certainty. Helena raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She had no idea what the young nun meant. When the evening came, the candles were lit, the seats were full, and the event began. Helena sat in the back row watching proudly as everyone performed their parts. The hymns, the readings, the laughter. It was a beautiful night. The young pianist walked up to play next. She was nervous, but when her eyes met Helena's, she saw calm reassurance. Helena nodded once, a silent reminder of their conversation. Play with honesty, not perfection. The girl began to play. The first few notes were shaky, but then her rhythm steadied. The melody flowed smoothly, warm and tender. Helena closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. For the first time in decades, she didn't feel pain when she heard the piano. She felt peace. When the piece ended, the audience applauded kindly. The girl smiled, her confidence restored. She glanced toward Helena and mouthed a quiet, "Thank you." Helena smiled back, her heart full. What she didn't realize was that this was only the beginning. The young nun had something planned, something that would soon change the quiet course of Helena's life forever. That night, as the candles burned low and the guests left, Helena stayed behind to help tidy up. The piano sat there again, silent and waiting. She walked past it slowly, feeling its pull. "Play," a voice whispered behind her. It was the young nun. Helena turned. "Oh no," she said softly, laughing. "Not me. Tonight belongs to the young nun smiled. "Sometimes the night belongs to those who have waited long enough." Helena hesitated, her heart beating faster. She looked at the piano, then at the young nun's hopeful face. Something deep inside her, something buried for 40 years, began to stir again. She sighed gently. "Maybe just one song," she said. The young nun smiled and stepped back. Then let the music speak. And as Helena sat down, her trembling fingers hovering above the keys, she didn't yet know that what she was about to play would not only change the lives of those who heard it, but would soon echo far beyond those convent walls, reaching hearts all around the world. The morning sun spilled through the church windows, casting golden lines across the wooden floor. The day everyone had been preparing for had finally come. The annual community gathering was one of the most anticipated events of the year. People from nearby towns were already arriving, their laughter and voices filling the courtyard. Inside the convent hall, the younger sisters moved quickly, arranging flowers, setting chairs, and making sure everything looked perfect. The air smelled faintly of candles and fresh lilies. Sister Helena walked slowly across the hall, holding a small basket of folded napkins. Her steps were steady, calm as always. But there was something else in her eyes that morning. Something deeper, like the quiet before a storm. She glanced toward the piano at the far end of the hall, the same one that had stirred so many memories inside her. For days she had avoided looking at it for too long, afraid that the longing in her heart might show. As she placed the napkins neatly on the refreshment table, she overheard two of the younger volunteers talking. One said, "The pianist called this morning. She's not feeling well. They're trying to find someone else before the guests arrive." The other shook her head nervously. "What are we going to do if no one comes? We can't have a celebration without music." Helena pretended not to listen, but her heart gave a soft, uneasy thump. The piano stood there, polished and waiting. Her hands twitched slightly, remembering the feeling of keys beneath them. Yet she said nothing. She was sure there were other people more capable, more suited for the event. After all, who would trust an elderly nun to fill the room with music? As the minutes passed, the worry in the air grew thicker. People whispered, checked their watches, and looked toward the empty seat at the piano. The priest spoke quietly with one of the organizers, his face drawn in concern. "We may have to do without the music," he said softly. "Let's just continue with the speeches and prayers." But then, one of the younger sisters, the same one who had once listened to Helena's story in the quiet of the night, stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. "Father," she said, "we have someone who can play." Everyone turned to look at her. The room went silent for a moment. "Who?" the priest asked gently. The young nun looked at Helena, her eyes full of quiet determination. "Sister Helena," she said. A few gasps escaped the crowd. Some people exchanged surprised looks. One of the volunteers whispered, "Her? She's so old. Can she even play?" The words hit Helena like a cold wind. She lowered her eyes, not in anger, but in humility. For a brief moment, she wanted to disappear into the crowd, to let the moment pass as though it never happened. But the young nun stepped closer to her, speaking softly. "Please," she said. "You once told me that music never truly leaves your heart. We need you now. Just once more." Helena's throat tightened. Her heart raced in a way it hadn't for years. She looked around, the hall full of people, the anxious faces, the waiting piano, and for the first time she felt something calling her stronger than fear. It wasn't pride or desire to prove herself. It was something purer, something divine. She nodded slowly. "All right," she said quietly. "I will try." The sound of her voice drew attention from every corner of the hall. Conversation stopped. Even the children outside fell silent as Helena walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavier than the last, yet lighter at the same time. The whispers followed her like faint echoes, but she didn't let them sink into her heart. When she reached the piano, she paused. Her fingers hovered just above the keys. The black and white notes seemed almost to breathe under her touch. Dust motes floated in the sunlight around her like tiny stars. For a long moment, she didn't move. Everyone waited, not knowing what to expect. She closed her eyes. Her mind drifted back through decades, to the stages she once stood on, to the nights she played under bright lights, to the people who once listened with hearts full of emotion. But most of all, she remembered why she had walked away from it all. The applause, the fame, the noise, none of it compared to the peace she had found when she surrendered her music to God. And now, as she sat before the piano again, she realized something she had forgotten. Perhaps she was meant to play again, not for herself, but for others. Her fingers touched the first key. It was a soft sound, uncertain, like the voice of someone waking from a long sleep. Then she pressed another and another. The melody began to take shape, slow, trembling, fragile, yet full of feeling. At first, the room seemed to hold its breath. People exchanged glances, unsure what to expect. But soon the melody deepened. Her hands, though aged, began to move with ease and grace. Each note seemed to speak a language older than words. The sound filled the hall like sunlight spilling through clouds. It wasn't the polished practice performance of a professional musician. It was something different, something alive. Every note carried a piece of her story, of years spent in silence, of faith and of longing. The young nun stood near the back, her eyes glistening with tears. She had believed in this moment when no one else did. And now, watching Helena play, she felt the entire room change. The people who had doubted her stood motionless. The whispers stopped. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Helena's face softened as she played. Her eyes were half closed, her lips curved into a faint, peaceful smile. Her fingers moved like they had been waiting for this moment all along. She didn't play from memory, she played from the heart. Time seemed to disappear. When the final note echoed through the hall, there was complete silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved or spoke. Then slowly, someone began to clap. Another joined. Within seconds, the hall erupted in applause. People stood, cheering, their faces lit with admiration and emotion. Helena sat there, her hands resting gently on the keys, a tear slipping down her cheek. She wasn't crying from pride, but from gratitude. After all those years of silence, she had been given a chance to share her gift again. Not for fame or attention, but to remind people that true talent, true beauty, doesn't fade with age. The priest walked forward, his eyes wet. That, he said softly, was not just music. That was a prayer. Helena smiled and stood slowly. Maybe, she said quietly. The prayer was always inside me. I just needed to play it again. The applause lasted long after she stepped away from the piano. People came forward to thank her, to shake her hand, to tell her how deeply they had been touched. Some said it was the most beautiful thing they had ever heard. Others simply smiled, unable to find the right words. As the evening light dimmed and the hall began to empty, Helena stayed behind for a while. The young nun joined her, standing quietly beside her. You did it, she whispered. You brought everyone together. Helena looked at the piano one last time. No, she said softly. Music did. It always does. When she left the hall that night, the air was cool and calm. The stars were beginning to appear, scattered across the sky like the notes of a song that never ends. She walked slowly back to her small room, her heart full, not of sadness or regret, but of peace. The music she thought she had lost had never really gone. It had simply waited, patient and silent, until the world was ready to hear it again. That night, as she lay in bed, she could still feel the keys beneath her fingers, still hear the echoes of the melody in her mind. For the first time in many years, she slept with a smile, knowing that sometimes miracles don't happen in grand ways. Sometimes they happen quietly, when one old soul dares to listen to the voice of her heart. The church was almost empty by the time the last of the guests left. The wooden doors creaked softly as they closed, leaving behind the faint scent of candles and flowers. Sister Helena sat alone in the front pew, her hand still resting lightly on her lap. The piano stood a few feet away, silent now, but it seemed to hum with the memory of her music. She could still feel the warmth of the applause echoing in her chest. She hadn't expected such a reaction. When she first sat down to play, she thought she might be laughed at or gently asked to stop. But instead, something different had happened, something she couldn't quite explain. It was as if time had stopped, as if every note had carried a message only the heart could understand. The young nun who had encouraged her stood quietly by the door, watching her. She didn't want to interrupt, but eventually she walked over and said softly, "They're still talking about it outside. Everyone is saying they've never heard anything like that before." Helena smiled gently, her eyes glimmering in the candlelight. "I didn't do much," she said humbly. "It was just a few old songs." The young nun shook her head. "No, it was more than that. You made everyone feel something. You reminded them of something they'd forgotten." Helena looked toward the piano again. "Maybe it reminded them of what's still inside them," she said quietly. "The part of us that never gets old." That night she went to her room thinking the evening's miracle would fade away like a dream by morning. But the world had other plans. The next day, one of the visitors, a young man who had come with his family, posted a short video of her performance online. He had filmed it from the back of the hall, not thinking much of it at the time. The sound wasn't perfect, but it carried the emotion, the stillness, and the beauty of that moment. He uploaded it with a simple caption: "An elderly nun plays the piano and silences the world." Within hours, people began sharing it. At first, just a few friends commented things like, "So beautiful," or "This gave me chills." But by the end of the day, hundreds of people had seen it. Then thousands. By the next morning, it had already reached millions. Across different countries, languages, and cultures, people watched the same video. An old nun, her hands trembling slightly, playing with such grace that even through a small phone screen, you could feel the emotion. Comments flooded in. This touched my soul. I cried without knowing why. How can someone play like that? She reminds me of my grandmother. Helena, of course, knew nothing of this at first. In the convent, she went about her usual routine, watering the garden, helping in the kitchen, praying in the chapel. She didn't own a phone. She didn't know how to use the internet. Life was the same for her, calm and simple. But outside those walls, her name began to spread. News outlets picked up the story. Some titled it, "The Miracle Music of the Convent." Others called it, "The Nun Who Played for the World." People wanted to know who she was, where she came from, and how such music could come from someone who had been silent for so long. A few days later, the priest received a call from a reporter, asking if they could visit and interview the mysterious pianist. The priest was surprised. "Interview?" he said, chuckling softly. "Sister Helena doesn't even know she's famous." When he told her about it, Helena's reaction was simple. She blinked, confused, and said, "Famous? Me? That must be a mistake." But it wasn't. The convent started receiving letters from all over the world. Some came from people who were ill, thanking her for bringing them peace. Others came from young musicians who said her performance had reignited their love for music. There were even a few from people who said they had stopped believing in anything good until they heard her play. Helena read a few of the letters in silence. Tears filled her eyes, not from pride but from a deep sense of wonder. "All this," she whispered, "because of one song?" The young nun smiled. "Because of your heart," she said softly. That's what people heard. Soon more invitations began arriving. Television stations, music foundations, even international music festivals wanted her to perform. Some offered large sums of money. Others promised recognition and awards. But Helena politely declined each one. "I played once," she said simply. That was enough. She wasn't chasing attention. She didn't need applause. All she wanted was to keep the peace she had found. But still, she was glad that something good had come out of that one quiet evening. One morning, while tending to her garden, she noticed two children standing by the gate, holding a small keyboard. They looked nervous, clutching it tightly. "Are you the lady who played the piano?" one of them asked shyly. Helena nodded with a gentle smile. "I suppose I am." The boy held up his keyboard. "We wanted to learn," he said. "Can you teach us how to play like you?" She looked at their eager faces, their eyes full of hope, and her heart softened. "I don't know if I can teach you to play like me," she said, "but I can teach you to feel the music. That's where it begins." From that day on, every weekend a few children from the nearby village came to the convent. They brought small instruments, some real, some just toys, and sat on the floor around her as she guided them patiently. She didn't teach them with strict lessons or complicated notes. She taught them to listen, to feel, and to understand that music wasn't about perfection. It was about honesty. The laughter of the children filled the convent in a way it hadn't for years. Even the other nuns joined in sometimes, clapping or humming along. It became a new rhythm for the quiet old building. A rhythm born from one act of courage. Months passed, but the video continued to circulate online. People still shared it, still wrote messages of gratitude. Some even traveled from far away just to visit the church where it had happened. They didn't come to see a celebrity. They came to see a reminder that it's never too late to shine, to dream, or to begin again. One afternoon, a well-known pianist visited the convent. He had flown from another country just to meet Helena. When he found her in the garden, she was kneeling among the roses, trimming the stems with careful hands. He introduced himself and she smiled, offering him a seat on the stone bench nearby. He told her how her performance had changed him, how he had watched it over and over, searching for the secret behind her playing. "Your fingers moved so gently," he said, "but every note felt alive. How did you do it?" Helena looked at him kindly. "I didn't try to make it perfect," she said. "I just played what I felt. Music is not in the hands, my dear, it's in the heart." The pianist sat quietly for a while, then nodded. "You're right," he said softly. "Maybe we forget that sometimes." Before he left, he asked if he could record a small message from her to share with his students. Helena agreed. She looked into the camera and said, "Don't be afraid to grow old. Don't be afraid to be forgotten. Just keep doing what you love even when no one is watching, because one day the world might finally stop and listen." That short clip went viral too, adding to her legend. But Helena didn't think of herself as a legend. She was just a woman who once loved music, lost it for a while, and found it again when she least expected it. One evening, as she sat by the window watching the sunset, The young nun came to her side and said, "Do you realize how many hearts you've touched?" Helena smiled softly. "Maybe," she said. "But it wasn't me who touched them. It was the music. I just let it speak." The orange light of the sun washed over her face, highlighting every line, every wrinkle, every trace of a life well lived. There was peace in her expression, the kind that only comes to those who have truly accepted their place in the world. Outside, the church bells rang gently in the distance. Helena listened, her eyes half closed. The world had changed because of one moment, one song, one act of courage. And though she never sought recognition, she had given something priceless, a reminder that beauty, faith, and passion never grow old. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Helena whispered softly to herself, "It's strange how a single melody can travel so far. Maybe that's what music is meant to do, find the hearts that need it most." And somewhere, far beyond the convent walls, her music was still echoing in homes, in hearts, and in memories, reminding the world that even the quietest voices can leave behind the loudest songs. The weeks turned into months, and Sister Helena's story continued to travel far beyond the walls of the small convent. The world seemed hungry for something pure and real, and her music had given people exactly that. Videos of her playing were still being shared on countless pages and channels, reaching places she had never even heard of. Inside the convent, life went on much as before. The bell still rang early every morning. The sisters still prayed together, worked in the garden, and cared for the community. Helena stayed the same, quiet, humble, and always smiling. She still spent time teaching the children from the nearby village, still played a few notes now and then when the hall was empty. But there was something different in the air. Visitors came more often now, some bringing flowers, others just wanting to shake her hand. A few came from faraway countries, their eyes full of emotion when they met her. They spoke through translators or simply through gestures, placing a hand over their heart as if to say, "Thank you." Helena never grew tired of meeting them, though she always seemed a little surprised. "I didn't do anything special," she would say softly. "I just played what I felt." One afternoon, a young journalist visited the convent. She was writing a feature about people who had inspired the world without fame or fortune. She brought a small recorder and asked Helena if she could share a few words for the article. Helena agreed, though she looked shy sitting before the microphone. The journalist asked gently, "What made you play that night? After so many years, what gave you the courage to sit at the piano again?" Helena thought for a moment. "Sometimes," she said, "we don't choose courage. It just finds us when the heart knows it's time." She paused, then smiled softly. "I didn't plan to play that night, but I saw everyone worried and I thought maybe my music could bring them peace. I suppose that's what music is for. It's a way of saying what words can't." The journalist asked another question. "How do you feel knowing the whole world knows your name now?" Helena laughed quietly. "The world forgets names," she said. "It remembers kindness, not faces. If people remember my story, I hope they remember what it means, to never bury your gift, no matter how small it seems." Those words touched the journalist deeply. When the article was published a week later, it went viral again. The title read, "The Nun Who Reminded the World to Listen to Their Hearts." It was shared in newspapers, websites, and radio stations around the world. People quoted her words, teachers read them to their students, and musicians used them as inspiration for their own performances. Despite the growing attention, Helena never changed her simple way of living. She wore the same plain habit, walked with her slow, steady steps, and spent her evenings sitting near the old piano, polishing its surface like it was something sacred. To her, it wasn't just an instrument. It was a bridge between her past and her purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, the young nun who had first encouraged her came to visit her in the small room by the chapel. She found Helena sitting by the window, a cup of tea in her hands. The light from the sunset made her silver hair glow softly. "You've become a legend," the young nun said with a teasing smile. "Do you realize people from all over the world are talking about you?" Helena chuckled softly. "A legend?" she said. "No, my dear. I'm just an old woman who loves music." The young nun sat beside her. "Maybe, but sometimes that's how legends are made." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the faint sound of birds returning to their nests. Then Helena said, "Do you know what I've learned through all this?" "What?" That the world is full of noise, she said slowly. Everyone is talking, rushing, trying to be seen or heard. But sometimes all the world really needs is a moment of stillness. That's what music does. It creates silence where hearts can listen again. Her words hung in the air, soft but powerful. Days passed, and Helena continued to teach the children music. One little girl who had never touched a piano before quickly became her favorite student. She was quiet, shy, and always afraid to make mistakes. But Helena would smile and say, "Don't worry about the wrong notes. Even mistakes can be beautiful if you play them with love." Under Helena's gentle guidance, the little girl began to bloom. Her fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence. One day, Helena asked her to play in front of the other children. The girl hesitated, but Helena whispered, "Remember, when you play, don't think about who's listening. Just tell your story." The girl played beautifully, and afterward she ran to hug Helena, tears of joy in her eyes. In that moment, Helena saw a younger version of herself. The same passion, the same fear, the same love for the sound of the piano. Months turned into years. Helena's hair grew whiter and her steps became slower, but her spirit never dimmed. She continued to play softly in the evenings when the hall was empty. Sometimes other sisters would stop outside the door, listening quietly as she played. The melodies were gentler now, slower, but full of life, like whispers of wisdom that words could never express. One winter evening, after finishing her prayer, she sat by the piano again. Her hands trembled slightly, but she smiled, pressing one key, then another. The sound echoed softly through the chapel. The young nun entered quietly, carrying a small candle, and said, "You're still playing?" Helena nodded, her eyes glowing. "As long as I can," she said. "Music is a gift you return to the world. You don't keep it forever." The young nun smiled and said softly, "Then the world will keep your gift forever." That night, Helena played for a long time, her fingers gliding gently across the keys, her heart full of peace. The music seemed to fill the air like a prayer, wrapping the convent in warmth. A few months later, one quiet morning, the church bell rang a little differently. The sisters gathered together, their eyes filled with tears but also calm acceptance. Sister Helena had passed peacefully in her sleep. On her bedside table lay her rosary and a small folded note. It simply said, "Play your heart, not the notes." News of her passing spread quickly. Around the world, people shared her story again. Thousands of comments poured in online, messages from people who had never met her but felt as though they knew her. Musicians dedicated songs to her. Schools named small music rooms after her. In one city, a mural was painted showing an elderly nun playing a piano surrounded by stars. The little girl she had taught continued to play, now older, her hands steady and sure. Whenever she performed, she would whisper before beginning, "This is for Sister Helena." Years later, her video, the one that had once gone viral, was still circulating. New generations watched it, not knowing when or where it happened but feeling the same magic every time. People said that even through the screen, you could feel something deeper than music, a reminder of grace, patience, and the beauty of never giving up. In the small convent, the piano remained exactly where it always had been. The sisters kept it polished, and every now and then, someone would sit and play a few notes. The sound always brought a smile, as if Helena herself were still there, gently guiding their hands. The young nun, now older herself, often told newcomers the story. She was just an ordinary woman, she would say, but when she played, she made the whole world remember what it means to feel. And somewhere beyond time and place, perhaps the music still lingered, soft, tender, eternal, echoing across the hearts of those who needed it most. Because the truth was simple. Even after the hands that played it were gone, the song never really ended. It lived on in every child who learned to play, in every listener who found comfort in her melody, and in every quiet soul who dared to share their gift, no matter how small. And so, the story of Sister Helena, the elderly nun who was once told she was too old to play, became a story the world would never forget. She had taught everyone, without ever trying to, that it's never too late to begin again, to create, to give, and to believe that even the gentlest note can move mountains if it comes from the heart.